I'm recording.
Can you hear me
Wait,
now?
would you have to?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Excuse me, my crayon is a monkey. I find this conversation very
taking some interest in learning a bit more about technology, philosophy, and I like to.
I'm an educator.
Absolutely. We're going to stay anonymous.
That's a cop out.
The binary's gone. I thought jingle was like Dutch for cheers.
Hi everyone, welcome to Beyond Binary Thinking.
The purpose of this podcast is to cut through the spam and spam and bring some yin and yang to the zeitgeist. Join us and replace the bipartisan tribalism of false dichotomies with a more nuanced, intelligent, and honest dialogue.
From Cadiz, I'm Finn.
From Slovakia, I'm Chris.
From Amsterdam, I'm Rijn.
And from Cordova, I'm Itamar.
Thanks, Noodles, for your enthusiastic responses to every single episode. It's amazing to realise we're approaching episode 10. We've come a long way, and it's because of all the feedback we've had that keeps helping us to improve. Thanks for sharing all your thoughts and joining us on this journey. If you have any topics you'd like to discuss or any guest speakers you think we should talk with, please let us know via Facebook or on Twitter. Do you have any feedback from our last episode, more specifically, chaps?
It's so positive, it's embarrassing. I don't want to report on all the lovely things people sent me, but it's true. We're getting better and better, right? Like, I'm enjoying every episode more and more.
Yeah, same here.
Since I'm new, I would like to hear. That's okay?
Yes, we have lots of feedback from people who listened to the last episode and agree with my take that it's our best yet. I think Fed was really interesting. It was an interesting topic. And although we struggled to stay on the topic of the episode, I think...
As we always do.
Yeah, the topic is more of a guideline, though.
Very natural course of things.
So hopefully we keep on point today. But the guests are enjoying when we don't. So let's keep it free. Let's keep it wild.
I couldn't even if I would try.
Right. So a massive shout out to our superfan Kareem for introducing us to this week's guest. Thanks for joining us, Itamar. Why don't you introduce yourself a bit and the topic for today?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for having me on your show, on your podcast. Should I do this again? I'm going to do this again. Hi, I'm Itamar. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
Welcome.
My name is Itamar. I'm Israeli. I'm 34 years old. I live in Spain. Just a side story. Me and my girlfriend live here together since she attends veterinary school, and this is the last year. So we're going to tough it out here in little old Cordova till she's done with her studies. Couple of points in general about myself. I served in the military in Israel. I served in a national service as well, which is basically something of a voluntary organization which you don't have to attend. But if you don't finish 100% of your time as a soldier, you can somewhat complete your time at the national service.
Which will be what kind of thing?
I volunteered in a kindergarten,
right?
Democratic school.
What a difference!
Right.
Quite a difference. Generally speaking, I think if I have to define myself politically speaking, I lean towards the left. Some things I'm a little bit more right-winged about, but like probably about middle right at most. Leaning towards the right, and on most things I would call even hyper-liberal. So I'm really trying to be my best critic, and just to be honest and to try to put myself in the center. And I like a little bit of banter and a little bit of good feedback, so we can really try to share and show the truth.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to have your opinion on the situation, I think.
Yeah, so we invited you on to discuss the topic of Israel. We had a chat last week as practice, and it was just apparent that we're all kind of open-minded, that this is a difficult topic to wade through, but definitely a necessary one. Just because something's controversial, I don't want to shy away from it, and I think really appreciate having your insights. So hopefully we have a good chat today.
Yeah, so should we mix it up and start by asking what are common logical fallacies we hear from people when they're talking about this situation? For me, one of them is the appeal to futility. So this idea that, the situation's so bad that there's never going to be any resolution. There's never, it's all doom and gloom. And that kind of takes away from the dialogue that can potentially help us to all understand the situation better.
Yeah, I've very much heard that, this is a thousands and thousands of year old religious feud, and that there's nothing that can be helped with regard to Israel and Palestine. And I just don't think that's true. If you look, most of the problems are based in fairly recent history. And this seems to me to be fairly clearly a battle about land. It's not about religion per se, specifically, or religious scripture. It's not two groups arguing over which God is the best God. It just doesn't strike me as a religious war, and I think that oversimplification makes things, as you said, Finn, make it seem as if it's impossible for anything to get fixed or anything to improve.
Or at least much harder than it potentially could be.
But so is the argument that it's just about land, maybe.
I absolutely agree with all these points. I think they're very true. I think the danger here is to lean towards the other direction, which is, I call it, the left wing agenda. It's very funny. I find myself on the left wing, but it's very cringy to be on the left wing in Israel when you hear the way we talk about this subject, because I think we look at it from both angles, from as an occupier and as a person of authority over another person who we don't actually see as equal. So I think one might say, if it's not a religious war, which I don't think it is, essentially, it's more of a cultural war. People might say, it has more to do with the Sykes-Picot Agreement. For people who don't know what the Sykes-Picot Agreement basically is, that the accord between France and Britain to divide the area and slice it up, and that's where you see straight lines on the map.
Mm-hmm.
Basically,
you missed that old-fashioned colonialism, hey man.
when you see straight lines on a map, you know the British have been there.
Or the French.
Someone, there's definitely two generals who don't know the area very well have just drawn some couple of lines on the latitude or longitude.
I'd say that's an unfair generalization of the British, but I'll allow it.
Okay. I have some criticism towards the mentality of historical mentality of the British nation, but I think it's fair enough. It's
don't hold back on that.
Yeah, no, it had nothing personal towards anybody.
No, it's just a historical fact, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't take credit for British military history, and I don't apologize for it either. It is a fact.
I think it's an historical fact. It's okay to address it. If we look at the world's map and see countries who have never been occupied by the British, it's going to be a very, very small.
If we ever want to do a short podcast episode, that could be one.
But generally speaking, what I was trying to say is this, mate. I think if you want to, you can always say, it's a religious war. We believe in A, they believe in B, and we can never bridge this gap. Or you can say, we're religious, they're religious. We can hash it out somehow. And then someone from the other angle will say, you know what? It actually has nothing to do with that. It has all to do with Sykes-Picot Agreement. So there will be kind of that will be opening an angle towards saying, the West is to blame. And okay, fair enough. But don't want to play the victim. You're looking for a solution. Yeah, everybody can blame white males for everything, and I don't know. The West is to blame. Very common notion in our area. We need to grow above it.
Right.
You sort of hinted at it with what you just said. Is it possible to have an opinion on this issue that isn't controversial? Because I've been thinking about this, and whatever angle you take, someone will object to. Is that an unfair representation of this discussion?
I I can answer it in a different way. Very Jewish answer. I'm not answering your question really, but I'm saying this: if you within your own tribe piss them off by having your opinions, but still don't have the opinions of the other side, you've probably said a few things that are correct, and you've hit a nerve. If you're on the left and you make a claim that pisses off most people on the left, but you're still not right wing, or if you're on the right, you make some opinions that seem to be a bit of left wing and piss off the people on the right wing, you've probably found a way to center yourself and to look at things from various angles. There is no one answer. I think it has something to do with everything. It had to do with religion and the way Israelis are being educated and the way Palestinians are being educated, and historical reasons, and why Jordanians have an agenda in the matter, and why Egyptians have an agenda in the matter. And historically, they owned both parts of Palestine, the West Bank and Gaza, at some point, and they've not treated their citizens much better than we did. It's just historically less known, I think. But I'm not going to get into that exactly. The point being is, it's not a new agenda. It's how you treat refugees and how you treat people without a home, and it's not we're not the first on the list to do so. So if you try to narrow it down to one answer to say, well, it's because we divided in a certain way or because of our religion, neither.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of speaks to the philosophy of this podcast, right? Anyone that has one answer for a complex problem is either deluding themselves or trying to lie to someone else. It's always more nuanced. It's always more complex.
Yeah, you need to come out of it from a holistic angle.
Yeah. But with regard to your point that if you're pissing off the other side, you're probably onto something. We don't normally have a problem pissing people off. But I'm eager to avoid it on this topic. I can't think of a topic more likely to get me permanently blackballed from employment than saying the wrong thing here.
Really? You're that
Chris,
fair.
it's really easy. Just don't have an actual opinion about it.
Brilliant. So, I mean, I think one of the important things that comes up in it is the disambiguation of criticizing Israeli government policy and conflating that with anti-Semitism. And sometimes it seems almost impossible to do. And I was reading a recent BBC poll that said of 22 countries voted, and although most countries on that list recognize Israel and its right to exist, Israel was the fourth most disliked nation.
After Pakistan,
Iran and North Korea. So yeah, you're in an impressive shortlist there. But then I've also read.
But this is talking about the nation as in the government rather than the people, right?
Yes,
Which
absolutely.
is a key distinction to make.
Right.
Sure,
Because
but
once
it's
the
not always
Israeli
made.
state, the Israeli people, and the wider community of Jews, right? It's not all the same thing.
Yes, but there are plenty of people that don't make that distinction, and would say that to criticize Israeli policy is based on anti-Semitism. The BBC is often accused of anti-Semitic propaganda, as is the Guardian. More recently, the Labour Party. So I'm sort of curious how we can separate these, and when there is some truth to that, and when there's not. Like if you could help me pick that apart, Itamar.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'll have to say that had I grown up in Britain and I would be watching BBC and reading the Guardian and whatnot, I'm sure I'd have a very different opinion of what's going on in Israel. I surely pick a Palestinian side solely because, well, naturally speaking, I'm looking to be on the side of the underdog, and they're for sure the underdog in this situation. There is no denying. Financially, socially, in every aspect you look at it, they're not doing very well, and it's largely our fault. But yes, do I think it's a balanced opinion? No, it's. I don't want to use hyper dramatic words here, but I would say horrendous would be a word that comes to mind when I hear the way they report things as if you talked about domestic violence. You would say, well, a poor man was struck by his wife with a heavy object at home. And under this situation, you will say, well, yeah, he must have deserved it. But there is no count for the other side. Nobody talks about what happened, what led to that point. There is no investigation behind it. In most cases that I see articles, especially from main media channels, it's very quick. And the reason for it is the way media and the way modern media and television is constructed. I don't think it has much to do with British television in general, or news broadcasting in general. It's much of a deeper problem than that. When you have a podcast, for example, you have 3 hours, you can cover a topic thoroughly. But if I have to edit an article for the BBC and I have 15 minutes to do so, and then we're moving on to the next item, and let's be honest here, 15 minutes is quite generous if you're talking about an article. Will I be able to explore it thoroughly or deeply, or even cover the entire subject? Most cases, it will be a big no. So what you're left is with a very superficial highlight and whatever catches your eye. So you could say Palestinians were killed, Israeli army did it, end of story. 40 seconds and go on to the next item. But then, if you want to say, well, there were some complexities and the situation wasn't that simple, and actually it was one of Hamas members, and then it got complicated, and it was actually a misfire, and then actually this happened. If you want to talk subtleties, it's not going to happen in mainstream media anymore. And I think people are starting to realize it slowly, and that's why people listen to podcasts much, and they listen to John Oliver or whoever it is that provides comedical media news broadcasting thing instead of mainstream television and news channels, because they don't seem to work
The actual reporting.
Yeah.
It's a really good point that you make, and I think that could even be an episode in itself about how kind of outrage is manufactured, because it's so kind of click-worthy,
Oh yeah, we should definitely maybe an episode, or I just at least like to plug here the Correspondent, which is a Dutch news website that is just recently launched in English as well, and their statement is basically away from the insanity of the day, away from the temporary of the day, where news is so caught up in this is happening right now, and a whoosh, new item. They look in much more deeper, slower content, long form articles, well researched, and it's something that is very much missing from, I think, international modern media everywhere.
Yeah, I think it's you can tell people that are watching news on a daily basis, and they'll get caught up in the outrage du jour, and it's rarely has any meaningful content whatsoever, and I much prefer getting a weekly or even monthly summary now, because I'd really find out, okay, with a month in hindsight, what actually mattered. Because I've started with Twitter recently, and I just can't get behind it, because it's minute by minute outrage on a different thing. And it really isn't the platform for me, I've realised. Whereas if I filter Reddit on a few good groups by the best of the last month, I'm frequently confronted with really interesting and positive stories that are quite informative from diverse voices.
One of my friends said, imagine if news was done every 10 or 100 years, how positive it would be, You'd be like, oh, look, poverty globally has gone down in the last 20 years. Isn't that great? It wouldn't be all of these moment-to-moment kind of instant outrage, as you say, Chris, moments being amplified.
That's very true.
So let's park that for a minute, and let's get back to the point of... I've got a question here. What's the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? Is anti-Zionism criticizing the government's policy? Can we go into that a bit more? Because I'm still a little bit confused. About
okay, so it depends who says that, really, is the answer. And who's saying it under what context. So it's context derived, but I'm going to try to answer it anyway. So I don't know what you guys define as Zionism, and I would love to hear what you guys think about it.
So it's funny, I heard anti-Zionist so much that I presumed I was anti-Zionist, because what I thought Zionism was and how I'd heard it defined, but mostly by opponents to it, was the desire for like this nationalistic, ever-expanding Israel, and sort of like, yeah, the expansion of Israeli territory. And so the arguments, probably from The Guardian, if I'm honest, was sort of portraying this like it's okay to be against Israeli imperialism and apartheid and criticize that. So that was always the connotations I had with Zionism. And then when I started researching honestly, just for this episode, I realized that the actual definition of Zionism, please correct me if I'm wrong here, is just believing in the right of Israel to exist as a country.
Oh, it's even more obscure than that, really. And I'm quoting here from, the guy who basically started this movement, generally speaking, is Theodor Benjamin Herzl. He's a Jewish Swiss man from that was born. I think he was born in Basel, but I'm actually not sure about that. It's somewhere in the mid-19th century. And to make a long story short, the general phrase that he used is to say, well, it's to revive the Hebrew language and Hebrew culture, and establishing independent Jewish sovereignty. Not necessarily in Israel. Israel wasn't even mentioned in the first 30 years of Zionism as a location. Uganda was considered, some place in the United States was considered. I think it was Nevada, I'm not sure. So basically, Zionism, if you ask an Israeli person, it would be, like Chris said, Israel's right to exist, or having our right to define ourselves as people with a place to be. Because, I don't know if you know this, but about every 60 to 80 years, Europe gets, I don't know, what is that word, like a little bit genocide-y.
That's a beautiful way of putting it.
You probably shouldn't laugh at that, but
it seems to be, that economically speaking, when things are not going so well for European nations, they seem to start looking left and right and look at the odd one out and decide to rally them up and chase them through town.
To look down upon some social group as like the other that's the cause of the problems, who are then scapegoated for the economic crisis that's happening.
Seems to be the British
today. The best example of that is actually the Gypsies. We look at the Gypsies.
Yeah.
Look, they don't have a country and they live in Europe. How are they doing?
Pretty badly in Spain.
Yeah, everywhere.
Say the least.
Yeah.
Even in Spain, it's
but
not even
that didn't
considered.
used to be any different
please.
60 years ago.
Yeah, it was similar 60 years ago.
In modern day Spain, and I hear this daily, they don't even consider being racist towards Gypsies a problem.
Yeah, and it was maybe worse in terms of the government oppression of the Gypsies maybe 60 years ago, but there's still it's very common here.
And Romania and Hungary are appalling in the way they treat their Gypsy population. Appalling, to say the least. I don't know if you guys have ever been there, but I've seen those villages where they live. They're adjacent the Slovakian border, and it's horrendous conditions. It's third world by all means. So generally speaking, people without a country don't fare well long term, especially in fickle.
So then Zionism is seen as essentially wanting to have a country somewhere in the world so that Hebrew culture and language can continue to exist. Is that essentially the idea of Zionism?
Essentially, yeah, that's a very accurate depiction. I say, look, I'm just going to answer it from my personal point, and I'll say this. The way I don't think about the word Zionism as the main concept here. I just think, okay, I'm a Jewish person. Jewish people have been persecuted throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia, really. And we were chased away from a certain country, originally speaking. This country historically was Israel. Am I religious? I'm not religious. But I do think that with the historical connection, you could definitely affiliate us with this land. So I find that it makes more sense for us to be here, rather like here in Israel, rather than any other place in the world. And I do not believe we are safe as a people without a country.
Right.
And I
So,
don't think many people are arguing against Israel's right to exist.
Well,
I,
well, might I interject here and give maybe an opposite point of view?
okay, please.
Because I would maybe like to question the existence or birthright of states or nation states in general. I think ancestral ancestral claims to land are as old and muddied as history goes. We've had huge migration flows. Ethnic depletions are also as old as history. Lines are redrawn. This can happen naturally over the course of time, or it can happen really quickly and artificially, as happened with the Sykes-Picot Agreement in World War One. And this conflict also partially stems from such an artificial line drawing. Groups claim right to states under certain political circumstances. This can happen, like happened with the Jews. They wanted to have a state. They had the chance in British Palestine to make it there. A conflict happened. Palestine territory got occupied by the Jews, and now you see the Palestinians asking for their birthright to a nation state. And this will just go on and on and on, right? This is history with groups displacement, claims to territory. Sometimes it works out, sometimes with independence movements it doesn't work out.
Absolutely. The question remains, look, I don't think that the best solution for the world in general would be divided into countries.
Right.
As a utopian concept.
Right, but do we need an
in
alien
reality,
invasion
right
to get
now,
there?
if we don't have... Sorry, please?
Do we need an alien invasion to finally get there? Or
Maybe we do.
We just need the British Empire again. Like, everything was fine when we were free to draw a straight line.
I actually don't think it's always the worst thing to have a sovereign nation. Some homogenous communities very well when they're homogenous. Actually, not very well when they give immigration. Some of them do very well with immigration. For example, the UK, I think, benefits a lot. Immigration from Pakistan and from generally the Middle East and India.
Africa.
I think they did, and Africa, I think they did wonders for the country. Yeah, my point of view.
Hey, I have spoken loudly and clearly about my love of most of the immigrant populations in the UK. If you walk around London, you can see the wonders it's done for the economy and for the culture. Again, we shouldn't talk about Brexit, but I don't think we need
Brexit buzzer.
I don't think we should conflate Brexit with immigration. I don't think the Conservative Party should have done it either.
No, but there's a wider point here about do we think that the concept of nation states is something that's here to stay? Is it just a tool as an interim? Is it an interim tool that we can use for now that might alleviate some situations that might be good for now? I mean, in 50 or 100 years, when we look back, do you think we'll be thinking, yeah, nation states were great? I mean, they've also led to some pretty horrific actions by governments, right?
Yeah, but like Itamar said, like if you're a people without a nation, you're at risk or in danger from people who do have a nation. And if you look at the history of evolutionary psychology, right, it's always forever been an arms race of getting the most number of people collaborating together. And nations did that very well. Then religion superseded that, and then you had capitalism that made traders of all of us.
Well, don't conflate nations with all communities, because nations is a fairly recent concept. It comes around at the time of printing. That's around the time where nation states were able to form as imagined communities in larger groupings. Before that, nations were not a concept, but maybe it's going to be a temporary good tool. And I'm not even saying that it is not a tool that we should use now, but isn't part of the conflict that in Israel and Palestine, that Palestine is being denied their rights to a nation state right now.
Okay. Part answer, I guess. First part will be talking about sovereign nations and whether they're relevant. I think some things are just the way they are right now. That's we can definitely challenge the concept of what is a nation, whether it has a right to exist, and whether it's the best solution or it's just the way evolutionary step towards something different. But right now, in Hebrew, we say this what is, and that basically means this is what we have right now, and this is what we're using in order to move forward. It's an axiomatic, momentary fact. So if we move forward and we say, okay, so Israel needs a sovereign nation and Palestinian needs a sovereign nation, so I believe. The question is, why don't we have it? And what are the agreements that were offered till now, and why haven't they been accepted? And who denied them, under what pretenses? And that's the thing. That's the main story, I think. To get into some who did what and for what. I think we can talk about the Palestinian Authority before Yasser Arafat's death and after, and what changed, and the first democratic elections they had, and then basically Gaza elected Hamas, West Bank elected Fatah or Palestinian Authority in general, and so on.
But not saying.
And why it's two different nations, really.
So, but history as history being, not saying we don't need to get into that, but do you think, like, with history having happened as it did, that there is a possibility for a secure two-state solution there? Is it on the horizon within the next 50 years?
I don't know if it's on the horizon within the next 50 years. I can say it's not on the horizon for the next 15 years. That I'm pretty sure of.
Right.
You had some interesting statistics about, the percentage of people that would accept peace on a broad range of terms.
Well, on a broad spectrum of people, most people in Israel, about 70% of Israelis agree to peace under certain conditions, and then that's obviously where you get a lot of spectrum. You get like maybe 20% who are willing to give 100% back, and then it differs until you reach 70%. Well, the rest of them were saying, okay, I'll give a very small portion, and the rest of them say absolutely not under any circumstances. And I'm sure you can find similar statistics on the Palestinian side, but the surveys that have been done on the Palestinian side were questioning, more generally speaking, whether they are willing to agree to a peace accord right now with Israel and recognize it as a sovereign state, or recognize its right to exist.
And what were the percentage of Palestinians? Were they similar to the Israelis?
Well, this particular survey, no, it was about 40%, 45%, depends on who says. But the question, I think, was a bit wrong, because they were trying to imply that this has to happen under the current conditions. And when they asked Israeli people, they said, generally speaking, would you consider having a peace accord with the Palestinians? So it's a very different question, because you and I can share a flat and we can have the fight of our lives today, and then Chris can come and say, "Will you consider to ever talking to him again?" And I'll say, "I will never consider it." It's the question that shouldn't be asked in the heat of the moment. You need to ask a more relevant question, or the same question.
To get an accurate comparison, yeah.
And with regard to that, I think at the moment when America thought that giving Palestine democracy would be the solution to all their problems, was anyone surprised that the Palestinians voted for the Fuck Israel party? Really?
Well, not all of them voted Hamas. Hamas was voted mainly in Gaza. The West Bank has historically been much more tolerant and much more open. First of all, I want to define a couple of things here that I think are not very often talked about in global media. Gaza and the West Bank are two different entities, mentality-wise, peoples-wise. If you ask people from the West Bank, what do they think about people from Gaza? They feel themselves sometimes, not always, sometimes you would get reactions. They feel themselves to be as different from them as they are from Israelis or Jews. So, three-state solution will be theoretically what you're aiming for here. You have Palestine 1 and Palestine 2, I guess.
Yeah.
But
will you ever recognize, or will there ever be a state recognized under control of Hamas? Right. That's what makes it partially difficult as well.
I think the question is not. I'm not a right wing in Israel, but I do think they make one claim that is legitimate. They say it can be Hamas, but our requirement is to say you have to recognize our right to exist officially on paper, and then we'll deal with you. And Hamas on the officially states that he will never consider such a proposal. But realistically speaking, most of Hamas officials say between themselves, and you can see it once in a while in Israeli newspaper, that they say, of course we recognize Israel.
Right.
It's a fact. It's a bloody fact. It's right in front of us.
It's such a wasteful position to take if you can't at least acknowledge it, right? Because
exactly. And we know that there's going to be a Palestinian country, a state. Some Israelis are very angry about the fact that it's not going to be part of Jordan, because the way a lot of Israelis perceive it, that Jordan is the Palestinian state. And demographically speaking, they would be correct.
And
the Hashemite
has better, ties, diplomatic ties to Jordan, right?
First of all, we have peace with Jordan and Egypt. So the countries who are basically engulfing the Palestinians are all at peace with each other. Which, hint, says something about the way we manage our power in the Middle East. Because if you look at the border of the Palestinian border on the Egyptian side, it's not very open. Most of the time, it's a shut gate. So the point I was trying to make is this, basically. You have two different entities. You have Gaza and you have the West Bank, and they hold different mentalities, and they also enjoy different levels of freedom. If you go to Ramallah, for example, Bethlehem or whatever, on a daily basis, you'll see that their life are exceedingly better than in Gaza. They do well. Financially, they do much better.
But there's a reason for that, right? Because Gaza is being basically starved. They have a sea blockage, and they're surrounded by walls.
Well,
and the West Bank is partially populated by Israeli migrants that are kind of populating the territory against the international rules.
I guess I have to be more specific about my definition. When I'm talking about the West Bank, I'm talking about Palestinian-controlled West Bank parts. I'm not talking about settlers and where they have settled.
But that's mixed, right? The territory is all mixed up, right? You have little patches here and little patches there.
Absolutely, I'm just making a comparison between
Gaza
quality
sort
of
of
life
like
of a Palestinian
little
person in the West Bank or Gaza. That's the only subject I'm trying to touch right now.
Right, but makes sense, right?
And they're under different leadership. So the question remains whether also that leadership has some partial responsibility to it, or whether it's just 100% Israel's fault, and we starve them and we deny them their basic human rights, and that's it.
I think it seems too easy to say that.
So look, I'm going to say this. I think the way we are handling the situation in Gaza is hyper aggressive. I do think that their regime is also illegitimate. Any regime that calls for the destruction of another country is illegitimate, in my opinion. And any country, generally speaking, this is more globally about human rights and women's rights and gay rights and everything. Countries who legislate and against homosexuals and against women and discriminate are not countries, I think, that a Western country can really negotiate on similar terms. I think the gaps in mentality are very, very deep.
Here's where I'm going to have to disagree with you. As Tyrion Lannister said, you make peace with your enemies, not with your friends. And although it's worthy and noble to say we should be for these values, and here are all these countries that share our values, let's talk about a less controversial example, North Korea, right? And North Korea comes out with all sorts of crazy things and says all sorts of things. And if America took the position of, we demand Kim Jong-un come out and say the following things, nice things about America, and until that happens, we're in a status of war with North Korea, how likely would that diplomatic negotiation go? Very poorly. And you just have to accept that these guys are desperate and crazy, and they're not going to say nice things about us. And if that's the line we draw in the sand, that, we need them to say this thing, well, okay, I get it. I do understand that, of course, in my opinion, Israel has a right to exist, and saying that really offends a lot of people, and it's a bad part from their side. But as you said before, there's such a power imbalance that when they say the crazy aggressive thing, it's like, well, you literally have to be the bigger man in this scenario, because North Korea is not going to be more diplomatic than South Korea by definition. Like, it's a crazy failed state.
I understand what you're saying. I've been hearing a similar claim for the last decade and a half, I think. And look, I don't disagree with you 100%, but it bugs me a little bit that I say this. Palestine have a right to exist, and they should exist within certain borders that are very similar to the 1967 borders and some exchange of territories. The second Camp David agreement, basically the agreement between Bill Clinton, Yasser Arafat, and Ehud Barak, the prime minister at the time of Israel in the year 2000, was talking about, I don't know exactly, but I think like was 97% of original territories, Palestinian territories, minus Israeli settlements. And as restitution, we were willing to give them about 13% extra territory from original Israeli land.
That seemed really close, right? Like, from my perspective, that seemed the closest we've got, at least, to peace.
I think I'm sure that was the moment when it seemed like the closest to us. Under the surface, I don't know if it's exactly the way it was, but the offer was a good offer, I think, for both sides, and that's why both sides were pissed, because it was fair.
So why didn't that work out then?
Okay, so here's the part when I make allegations towards the Palestinian leadership, and I really need to clarify this. I think Palestine should exist, and I think they should have a sovereign state, and they deserve that as much as any people on the planet. And I do think we should leave our settlements and maybe keep, maybe the 2-3 biggest ones as and exchange territory in return, and even compensate for the loss of territory. I absolutely think so. There's, for me, no other way about it. But I do think the Palestinian leadership is thoroughly corrupt, and they have every interest in this world to keep this conflict ongoing, because the amount of foreign aid that they receive per annum is the highest amount of foreign aid per capita in the world for any nation in the history of mankind till now. And the amount of money that actually managed to trickle to the economy and to the hospitals and schools is unfortunately a very small amount. I read a few different reports, and some of them say maybe about 20% actually reaches people, and some say that if maybe 70% actually reaches people, and the rest gets funneled into Swiss bank accounts. And I don't know how much a toilet really costs, but I'm sure it doesn't cost 600 euros to install a toilet. But look at the bill. That's what it says.
There's a corruption going on somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, well, I did check the facts on that, and as far as I can tell, it's true. Like, if you look in comparison, like the Marshall Plan that kickstarted Europe again after the Second World War, right? Pales in significance compared to how much money the Palestinians have been given. And you're like, well, where is it going?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's the end of the world to criticize your so-called enemy. Palestinians are not my enemy. I need to say this very clearly. Yeah. I had a Palestinian girlfriend. I have Palestinian friends. We get along wonderfully. And do we disagree on things politically? Of course we do. Who doesn't?
Yeah. But you need to be able to criticize. You definitely need to be able to criticize both parties.
But the point is to say, look, they suffer from an epidemic of corruption, and the Arab world in general is corrupt when it comes to their regimes. And it's something you can demonstrate again, time and again. If you look, for example, at let's look, for example, the list of countries by Human Development Index. The Human Development Index is compiled also of freedoms. And Arabian countries, generally speaking, don't do well. List of countries by inequality adjusted, the HDI. It's also the first country to appear on that list. I'm not sure which one it is actually, but I'm pretty sure it's either Qatar or the United Arab Emirates. But aside from a couple of small nations in the Gulf, most of them are below the 60th place. And this is, here I'll put it, for example, Palestine is on number 76 on this list, while Israel stands, and this is between Algeria, and the Dominican Republic, while Israel is on the 27th place between Estonia and Poland, and the United States and Hungary and South Korea. So the concept here is that I think we have also our reasons to maintain this conflict. The right-wing government that we have right now, in order to self-preserve, obviously fuels this conflict constantly. He pours just enough gasoline on the conflict to keep it going, but not out of hand, which is also, of course, not very well managed, but that's a different topic. But the Palestinian Authority received a buckload of foreign aid, and there is every reason for them in the world to keep this ongoing. Otherwise, foreign aid is gone. And
But that
the
goes
reason
two
for
ways, right?
existence
It's basically a proxy location. Israel receives foreign Western aid as well, especially from the United States. So it's used as a proxy war between the East, the Islamic and the Western progressive, maybe more Western.
I beg to differ.
Yeah.
I think there is a underlying difference here that makes a big difference. Our foreign aid doesn't end up in our leaders' bank accounts.
Well, no, but it does go towards buying weapons, which, is arguably as problematic.
I don't think our system is without flaws, but I think you can definitely say when something is inherently corrupt or something is not being handled well. You can say, for example, the election system in the United Kingdom is by nature corrupt, and thus everyone they elect or don't elect don't matter. If you negate everything,
whereas if there's
where do you start?
Room for improvement and some fixes, then
exactly. So
it's not a broken state. It's not a broken system. Yeah,
exactly. And Israel is not doing perfectly well, but we're not a broken system.
Well, I mean, I'm interested. I really don't know this. It's not a leading question, but King Bibi has won 4 elections. So
yeah,
I'm genuinely asking because I'm unsure. How democratic is that? Because it sounds almost similar to Vladimir Putin length of power.
It sounds on the surface it looks the same. Look, I'm on the left, and if you say the name Benjamin Netanyahu in my family, people cringe. But he is unfortunately very much democratically elected. And I mean, I would say I'm not his biggest opposer or anything, but if you look the way his family even carries itself, his wife is out of control and she's mean to the help and she throws shoes and fits, and his children make super ultra right-wing racist comments on Twitter, and they gang up with billionaires and paid strippers to do horrendous things. It's not a very moral family, to say the least. So to say that I'm on his side will be the last thing ever. But
terrible right-wing leaders are being democratically elected everywhere. And I think even Putin, I mean, Russia lost Putin. He had done a great propaganda campaign in Russia. People in Brazil
I don't know
vote Bolsonaro.
The level of democracy there
he's
is the
terrible,
same,
but they voted him.
Yeah.
He might be the least bad option for that country, to be honest.
Bolsonaro? Let's do another podcast about that one.
Yeah, I think next one we're going to talk about Venezuela.
It's like Israelis said that the elections when Hamas won were rigged, because that's what you want to believe. You say, no way they chose those people. They probably want a moderate socialist leadership like Fatah.
Well, everyone loves democracy till their side doesn't win the election, right? Right. It's corrupt.
Well, I say as a person who is mainly on the left, the difference between the right and the left in this concept is the right gets angry and the left throws a tantrum. Because we somehow are very convinced that we're right when we're so deeply self-assured about it that we feel so entitled to our part of the deal. We don't even think we have to fight for it.
Yes, I've been arguing with several left-wing people on that very issue, hoping that they can put together a more coherent and persuasive argument.
The spectrum is larger on the left, I think. Because when you're right, that's very black and white type of thinking usually. You're right, this is my land, this is your land. I'm not going to give you my land, you can bugger off. Left-wing people, usually, generally speaking, say, well, there is a situation, and it's complicated. So what do we do about it? And then you have a variety of solutions. So that's why I think, generally speaking, the left tends to be a bit more gray, and whereas the right tends to be more black and white.
And it doesn't fare so well in democratic, where you have to get a majority behind one clear idea.
Well, especially not in modern media, where you wanted to have it very quick, very easy, and very digestible, the answers.
Yeah. Yeah, it all ties in with what we were saying before.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, back to the topic.
So back to the topic. Look, I want to get started, basically. Okay, so I do want to criticize the Palestinian Authority for being corrupt. I think that's fair, and I think they will do everything within their power to keep this conflict going. It's not logical that Yasser Arafat was offered basically 110% of whatever he originally asked for and still denied it. He had an agenda, and that agenda was to keep the conflict ongoing because him and his family were to benefit from any foreign aid that arrives. Till this day, Suha Arafat, his wife, I think she gets something around $50 million. I have the exact number somewhere written somewhere here, but his wife still gets about $50 million a year.
Jesus.
That's shocking. That's shocking.
Or Mohammed.
So basically speaking, I'm sorry, 20 million.
It's still a sizable chunk of cash.
This doesn't really make much of a difference, does it? That's so much money. It's insane.
So what happened is you take people. I'm going to talk like a colonialist bastard. Sorry.
Enjoy.
And you say, I come to this region. I throw in these people who've never known democracy before. I say, now you're democratic, and here's some money, and go play with it. And also, here's your leadership, and they're going to be fine. They're going to be democratic. We said it's democratic now. That's not how it works. You can't. People didn't have this experience before, and now they're showered with foreign aid, and no one guides them. There's no conditions, no terms, and of course it gets out of control. It's a banana republic.
Yeah, and that's honestly what the European left says, is that a lot of the problems in the region are exacerbated by the naivety of American foreign policy.
So if you look at the Palestinian people, they will say, I don't care. I just want to go home, put on the telly, watch some football, give them 5% less, give us 5% more. I don't like Israelis. I don't have to like them. I just want to go home after work and watch TV. Yeah. That's what every normal person wants in most countries.
Yeah.
But they're not in control.
So and
they're not in a democratic regime.
Is the solution to, I've read, to have more of a pan-Arabic coalition of Jordan, Egypt, Palestine, figure out the solution together, or better leadership?
I think the Saudis are, at the moment, are the only people in the region who have credibility on both sides.
Yeah, because, I mean, so you said earlier, Jordan is the obvious person to get involved. But I think it was you who told me that, interestingly enough, they don't want the Palestinian refugees, right? It's why they're not showing more leadership in the area.
Well, let's look about it. Let's look at it demographically. Okay, Jordan. I'm gonna pull up the Wikipedia page because I don't want to get it wrong. So I hope that's okay with everybody.
Absolutely.
We wait to country.
Not so Jordan, not Peter Andre's ex-wife, right?
No, not Jordan Peterson either.
So, Jordan Peterson.
My university made a rule that you couldn't cite Wikipedia in your essays, and every time I would cite Wikipedia at some point, and then I would also cite a study that showed Wikipedia. I would say, I understand this is in conflation of this rule. However, here's a study that shows Wikipedia is more accurate than the average source.
Yeah, but it was found to be more accurate than the British Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
So you just got to cite the sources of Wikipedia and then get around that problem really nicely.
Wikipedia is always right. Wikipedia link.
That's amazing. Okay, so let's discuss Jordan for a second. What's their interest in the Middle East, basically? It says here that about 2 million, more than 2 million Palestinians living in Jordan right now, and I think actually quite a bit more identify themselves as Palestinians in Jordan, but that's a different topic. So if you look at the map of Jordan and you look at the West Bank used to be Jordan until 1967. I think we all know that, right? And the Jordanians said, okay, we've lost the war, a post-6-day war. They've lost this territory. And they've also lost 2 million Palestinian refugees. And we're left with the rest of the amount at home, so to speak. And come 1994, King Hussein, who is the Hashemites are the native people of Jordan, officially speaking. That's debatable as well, but we're not going to get into that. And the Hashemite kingdom made an informed decision. We said, okay, we have a large population of Palestinians living in Jordan. Do we really want to add 2 million
more
refugees to the mix? Oh, did we just give up that piece of land, that piece of cursed land, and we get trade agreements, and we get some water diverted from the Jordan River towards our benefit, and other foreign aid and development deals, and all those goody things that we can do while using Israel as a way to see, and all those things. And we get to get rid of 2 million Palestinians. So they look like they conceded something. They didn't concede anything. It was a cursed piece of land for them. It's a demographic disaster for the Jordanian kingdom. Why would they take it? If you could rally up all your refugees in Britain, and then France will occupy that, and let's say that's about the size of Bristol, and then you make an agreement, you make an accord, and you say you get a lot of compensation for this territory, plus they get to keep the immigrants and all their claim to land. Perfect.
I mean, if you look at the Calais jungle, that was kind of the deal, right?
Oh, yes, it has a lot of similarities to it.
Yeah, it was just us making it France's problem. Interesting. Honestly, that's a perspective I haven't heard before. It's really a valuable insight.
I try to keep it honest because I don't think Israel is without fault here. We also had this Zionistic, and now I use the Zionistic word
Okay.
as a negative one because it transformed itself, and we said, oh, yeah, Zionism means to have all of Israel and to have a foot everywhere. And so, okay, occupying the eastern part of Jerusalem, the western part of Jerusalem and the eastern part and uniting them made sense. Historically speaking, okay, we're the land of Israel. We get to have Jerusalem. Okay, we have natural claim to it. You know what? I can stand by it somehow. But then they say, okay, well, we have the rest of the West Bank here, and we need to find a way. This was 1967. I'm talking about, or the early 70s, to be more exact. A couple of years after it was military regime in that area, and the Israeli government, which was, by the way, very much left wing at the time, said, okay, we need to find a place to put a footprint in this place and to claim this land. Otherwise, it's just going to be an empty place. And then come time for a peace accord, we're going to have to give this part of the country back. So we started doing settlements. This is the story of the settlements. The settlements were actually left-wing, Zionist, socialist movements, mostly in the beginning, that settled on the hills, the empty hills of what used to be Jordan. Before we occupied any places there were actually Palestinians living there at that moment, like Hebron and what have you. We started occupying empty territories first and establishing settlements there. So when a peace accord would strike, we would have a claim to the land as well. And this is exactly what's happening. But the problem is that the ideological right and Reform Jews and conservative Jews, basically Jews with yarmulkes, not suits, not Hasidic Jews, wrote on this concept and said, you know what, actually it makes total sense. It's the concept of the whole of Israel. And we arrived to this point when it started from a notion of keeping a territorial claim so you can negotiate for a piece of land better, and it became an ideological war. And the right wing rode on that into power. And in 1977, they actually managed to get into power in Israel for the first time in its history, which is amazing to have a country that was solely left wing from the 1948 until 1977. It shows a great deal of lack of democracy, I'd say. I mean, officially we're a democracy, but if the left wing keeps getting elected, then something happened wrong. So it was a mixture of the right rising up in Israel, and then religious people claiming that land across the border, across the Green Line, and somehow it became a religious war. But up until the late 70s, really it wasn't about that at all. West Bank and occupying it. The Jordanians lost it in 1967. After a couple of years, the Israeli government decided to move some settlers into that area. I think probably in order to have a future claim of this land when time comes to actually sign the peace treaty with Jordanians, or generally Pan-Arabian Forum. And somehow it evolved into this right-wing religious concept of reclaiming the entirety of Israel. So it transformed into this odd ideology that has nothing to do with the original intent.
And do you think people buy that ideology?
Absolutely. Most of my friends are behind this ideology that Israel belongs to. All of the land of Palestine is Israel. And
why do you think that is? Do you think that's related to the education system and what people are taught in school?
I think they look at it only historically speaking, that at some point we were the people of the place.
But yeah, Itamar, this is similar to what I tried to say as well, with like boundaries are shifting and different groups claim different ancestral claims. How far back do you want to go?
So let me ask you actually, what do you think about, let's do a quick historical review. So Israel existed as the land of Jews, let's say 5,000 years ago, roughly speaking, until 2,000 years ago. Then we were officially exiled, and then it was, I say quotes unquote, of course, no man's land, and then Palestinian people came to be. I don't know when exactly, because officially speaking, we're talking about less than 100 years ago when they first defined themselves as a people. But obviously they were the same people that live in there for centuries, so it doesn't matter to me if they define themselves as Palestinians or just the people of the place. And then we arrived 100 years ago almost, and we settled it and we conquered some of it, and now we call it the land of Israel. So how old must the place be for it to have a legal claim to a territory?
Yeah, it's a thought-provoking way of looking at it, because I do think often Israel hides behind genuine criticism by shouting, "Oh no, that's anti-Semitic," and where it's like, well, okay, but can we talk about what just happened without you hiding behind that shield? And at the same point, I think it's hypocrisy is a valid criticism, right? Because for a British person to be saying, "Hey, that's colonialism," like, okay, Britain. So...
Remember we were talking about it last time. It's the kind of like Bill Cosby telling you off about sexual misconduct.
and I mean, yeah, really, at what point did the British Empire end? Like 50 years before the date we're talking about Israel's inception? Not even. I mean, as you said, Britain's directly involved with drawing the lines on the map. So it does reek of hypocrisy, right?
I really want to ask, I'm asking everybody here, I want to ask, really know, do you think, for example, just as an example, do Caucasians in the United States have a claim to the land as well? Or do they have no right and they should pack up their things and go to their original
by
country?
definition, this podcast deals with dispelling false dichotomies, and that is one such one, right? Like, clearly we're past the point where rewinding most mass immigrations is possible. So just as I don't like the rights claim that, they should go back home, you're like, well, they're people who've been here for hundreds of years. Like, go back to when? Do we want to take Britain back to the point before the Romans invaded? How far back are we setting the timer, right? So
well, no, not even
guys. Like, it was a two-part thing. I was going to say the counterbalance on the other side as well. So let me counterbalance it before you disagree with the clickbait headline, right? So and then I also disagree with kind of the left's claim, where they say that, we should, give them entire rights and we're oppressive colonials and white man doesn't have a place in the United States or so on. So I do see both sides. and I do understand the nuance. I think.
No, I'm on the first part. I'm definitely, but not even. Not even. You thought I was against you, but I was gonna say not even 100 years, but about fucking 10 years. There's a family now in Holland, a migrant family that the government wants to put out of the country. Young children, they speak Dutch. And a church is now doing 24-hour ceremonies with that family, because here in Holland there's a rule that the police cannot come in during a church ceremony. So different pastors from all over the country are now doing a uninterrupted service to keep that family away from immigrant police. And the argument is they've been here for 10 years. They feel connected to this area, let them be in this area. So I don't think that the claim to time is important at all. History creates situations, and then the situation is the situation. So where Israel is now there, whether it was there, whether Jews were there thousands of years ago, for me is not an issue. What for me is an issue is Israel is right now, it's there.
I agree.
Same as Palestinians are there.
Same about Palestinians. I
Yeah.
don't care if they officially named themselves as Palestinians 100 years ago, or they're de facto Palestinians 1,000 years ago, and they just named themselves something different. I don't care. I'm looking at it at I'm trying to look at this situation from above for a second to say, as an adult, you have two sides. They've defined themselves as people. They have historical claim to this land. I don't care if it's 100 years ago, 300, or 3,000. This is what you have right now. These are the terms. This is what you're going to deal with. What do you do from this point forward? Talking about who is right historically up until this point is just futile. It's not incorrect. It's fair. It's a discussion that can be made, but not under the pretense of trying to find a solution for this current situation. That's just dragging it backwards. If you're talking about the real solution for the current situation, it would lie somewhere within the borders of 1967. I do have concerns about terrorism after signing such an agreement, and I will explain. The government, I'm talking about the West Bank for a moment. I'm just going to leave Gaza aside just for a couple of minutes, just because it's hard to cover both topics. It's dancing on two weddings in one moment. It's impossible. The West Bank sits on a plateau that's about 600 meters higher than the valley below it, where Israel would be. Okay? Now, if we're talking about rogue terrorist group with rocket launchers, there are a lot of them, especially in Gaza, and rarely, well, much less in the West Bank. And the Israeli claim to that scenario would be, well, we're giving them the high ground, and they're just going to bombard us. And I think that's a very distinct possibility. I think that might happen. But first of all, I think you reclaim the legitimacy by saying, okay, if they own a country and they have a sovereign nation, they need to own up and take responsibility for any event that happens under their leadership. So you equalize terms. Of course, we're still going to be a superpower military-wise if you compare them to us. It's no fair game, but you can at least require or demand the sovereign nation to be in control of its territory. But in order to do that, you're going to have to give them that territory first.
Sure, but if you want, if you want the Palestinians to play by the rules of war, right? You have to also be willing to do that yourself. And there is a problem, as muddy as the waters might be. Most of the UN is pretty clear on this. That, as you said, the 1976 borders, like that. Yeah, most of the 67. There you go, Spoonerism. Thank you for clarifying. Most of the UN would like that to be broadly agreed to. And I think what's really interesting about what you just said is how militaristic. Now, I understand why, the history of it, but how militaristic the government's thinking is. That, we can't concede the high ground. Now, there's a good reason for them thinking in such military terms, and it'd be naive to think otherwise. But that's an interesting phenomenon of this, because the war has gone on for so long. What is it? The longest military occupation ever, it's defined as?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right.
That's the definition of it. I have some...
It's a controversial definition. Okay, well, I'll let you get into that, but let me just finish to this point. So,
please go ahead.
less controversial. You've had a very, very long war, ongoing war, right? And also, as you yourself did military service, as so many people do. And I wonder, like, do you think another part of what makes peace so difficult is that you have people that have been in war for generations, and that defines their thinking. And even part of that military service, it's like everyone sees that as part of their life and part of their growing up. And I'm sure once you've done military service and seen your friends die and been involved in firefights, you can't help but think politically about peace very differently. And I wonder, is that a vicious cycle?
Well, I think you made a great point up until the last second, and then it took a right turn because your point is valid. It's great, and I really want to address that. I just have to say that the last part about doing the military service, I think if you just look statistically speaking, most people who finish their military service don't really change their political mind.
Okay.
People who were on the left before being soldiers usually are of the left when they're done being soldiers. It doesn't really change their opinions that easily. I think it's mostly tribalism and the way we were brought up much more than those 3 years in the army. I know some people who changed their minds slightly, but it's really an odd one out. It's a rare occasion. So I think up until like the early 90s, or let's say late 80s, me and my dad, for example, used to go do our shopping in Gaza. Right? We just get into a car and just go to Gaza, go to the market, do our shopping. My father is a contractor, so his a lot of his handyman and electricians and whatever used to be Palestinians from Gaza. It's convenient. They know the lay of the land, and they're good at their job, and they charge a little bit less. And that was great for him, and he still has friends in Gaza that he calls on the phone and see how they are after they've been bombarded. How crazy that is!
Wow.
Yeah, he calls, he cares. How are you doing? I've not seen you for 20 years. But those people's children won't see our side as humans anymore. They've been indoctrinated into a certain way, and that's how they're going to see Israeli people, because they don't. I mean, Hamid, the guy who, I don't know, a friend of my father, he just is Israeli. He sees that we're caught up in our own storm, and that's why we're here. He doesn't blame Israelis or Jews in particular for the situation. He blames the government because he's able to make that separation because he knows the Israeli people. He had interacted with them. The next generation didn't get to interact with us anymore, and thus they have a very strong and black and white opinion about most of us most of the time because of circumstances. And the same goes for us. Israeli people have a very black and white opinion about and then I'm not going to say Palestinians, Gazans, because the word Palestinians is a very broad spectrum of words. You have about 23% of the Israeli population who is Palestinian, right? Palestinians are 23% of the Israeli population with Israeli passports, right? They're my dentist, they're my cardiologist, they're my teacher in school. All these people, my boss at work.
And how do they look at it then?
It's very complicated, especially for their new generation, by the way. It's very interesting as well.
Because they've had
Facebook generation.
They have contact with the Israelis. I mean, I was going to say, like, the closing
They
off
are
of Gaza
Israelis.
is going to make...
Well,
if you can't live together, you're just going to make it worse and worse and worse, right?
I definitely agree. I think what's funny about this situation with the Arab Israelis, first of all, to call them Israelis, I don't want to offend anybody. So if any person who is Israeli and is Arabian and he says he's Palestinian and non-Israeli, I fully accept that. It's a way to see yourself. But 18% of all Israelis are Muslim, and 2% are Christian and Arab as well. Druze are another ethnicity that, well, you could say Arabian, but not Arab.
Well, defining Jews as an ethnicity is complicated, right? Because some people you'd say traditionally come from that area. A lot were immigrants from Eastern Europe.
I'll make it simple. I'm Arab.
Right.
I'm Jewish, but I'm Arab. My father is Yemenite Jew. What do you think they spoke at home? French? I don't think so. Right? They spoke Arabic. They don't see themselves better or different from Arab people. When my grandma looks at, well, God bless her memory, of course, she would, when she spoke to Arab people on the street, she didn't have a concept of that a different person. That's just a person. So we've been indoctrinated a little bit from the West on this angle, and this is like also clash of culture. So I need to separate three different concepts here, okay? So you have the concept of what is Jewish, what is Israeli, and how are Arabs in Israel experience being partially Israeli, partially Palestinian, and partially Muslims, and or is it Palestinian, or is it Arab, or is it, what is it? Is it Palestinian and also a nationality, or also an identity, or what does it mean? So in order to make this subject a little bit clearer and to speak a little bit axiomatically, taking the risk of being wrong, we have to say something that has any meaning, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So 21% of Israelis are Arabs. And Arab groups in Israel mostly define themselves as Palestinians, according to recent surveys. But if you talk to them, most of them say, yeah, I'm happy to live in Israel. And a lot of them don't mind to live in Israel. They don't deny that it's a racist country towards them many a times. But they are happy to live in that country nonetheless.
Well, because it's well governed, right?
Yes, because, look, I don't try to wishy-wash this situation. If I'm an Arab Israeli, I face racism on a much higher level than any Jew, except if you're Ethiopian. But that's a different subject. Ethiopians get the worst treatment in Israel, by far, worse than Arabs. And we're a highly racist country when it comes to African people. That dealt with should be uprooted, really. But that's just a side note. Arabs in Israel, most of them live a reasonably comfortable life, better than any other Arab nation, except maybe Emirates and Qatar, I think. When it comes to their daily experience, that's where the problem really starts. Because if you just, you have to prove yourself once and again as an Arab that you're not a traitor to the country, and you deserve whatever it is that you deserve. And the test, even to get into university, is theoretically harder for Arabs because it contains a part about Hebrew knowledge. Why I, as an Arab person, must know Hebrew to such an extent? Why can't you teach in Arabic? 21% of the population, we've been here forever. So they have a lot of claim to the land, but generally speaking, I think most of them are willing to accept themselves because of that treatment that is mostly equal, as partly Arab, partially Palestinian, and partially also in a dark room when no one is listening, also Israeli. And I think it's kind of similar to have you ever seen African American movements in the United States when they talk about visiting Africa? And so it's kind of a place when you don't feel like, okay, you say, as an African American, I'm an American, and I'm proud to be an American. I have no conflict with that. But I do think I'm African. I feel African, and also genetically and historically, I'm African. I want to go to the motherland.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, and they land and they say, what the hell? I want to go back home.
Right.
Yeah, I mean...
It's the culture. Like you said, the guy who lives there 10 years...
If your favorite food is KFC, then you're probably not an African.
Yeah, like those immigrants that you were talking about in Holland, their kids, they're Dutch. That's it. You're born in Holland, you
can't go
Dutch.
back, right?
You think in Dutch. This is your mindset. You're Dutch.
I don't know. I don't know whether it's up to us to define whether African Americans are African or not, though, right?
No, I'm saying that
I don't know. I think
it doesn't matter how they find themselves. If they land in any African countries, they feel the odd one out. Usually, I'm sure. Like as me as a Yemen Jew, well, I can scream I'm Yemen to the rooftop, but as soon as I land in Yemen, I say I want to go home. I don't belong here.
I'm not sure that's the case every time. That's all I'm saying.
No, absolutely not. And that's just it's a blanket statement. It has a lot of problems
Yeah.
I'm not
Just
trying
for
to
the
say
for the
that-
sake of analogy, yeah.
Yeah, for the sake of analogy, I have to say this is the closest to a blanket statement that can
Right.
be accurate and can be used
Yeah.
to promote the subject.
So,
So where were we?
some of the things you say are really positive, right? And the idea that there's such a mix, and the average person wants peace, and it's, you know, like a lot of it sounds positive. But then when I hear the news, I hear some really bad news. And again, it's probably more the government than the people. But let's not forget how important the government is. So, I mean, you said about the racism in Israel. And I know the argument that's often bandied about is, but if you look at the region, Israel's, you know, very liberal in comparison to, you know, these Middle Eastern theocratic dictatorships. And I'm like, yeah, but that's setting a low bar from comparison. Like, we're better than the Saudis is like, well, do you want a medal for that? I don't know.
First of all, yes.
Get that man a medal. Give him a medal right now.
We live in a very difficult region with some neighbors that are not very friendly. Even the ones we have officially peace with are not very friendly, to say the least. And still, if you're a Arab homosexual man and you're Christian and your boyfriend is Muslim, and you can live in Tel Aviv, walk hand in hand in the middle of the street, smoking weed, and walk your pet dogs, and no one will say shit.
Right, that does count for something.
Yeah.
So I want a medal for that, and I want a medal for when a member of parliament who's Arab can go on stage, and I'm proud of that, and she can go on stage and say, I despise the land of Israel. I wish it doesn't exist. I deny its right to exist. And she is allowed. People are outraged, but she's allowed to say it on stage in front of the entire Knesset. That's amazing. Is our system flawed? Heavily. Are we racist? Horribly so. But we are a mostly functioning democracy in a region that's not functioning very well on a democratic level.
Right. It's a journey from good to great. If you can only be great, and if you're not, it's a failure. That's not a way to look at it, I think.
I totally see what you guys are saying, but it's not like, you look at little Jimmy from third grade and you say, Jimmy, you can run 100 meters in 20 seconds, but surely you can do 18. No, he didn't. He did it in 11, and then you tell him he can do it in 10. He's not Usain Bolt. He has limitation. Okay? So if you ask if that kid deserves a medal, by all means he deserves a medal.
In the hate crime Olympics, he's doing okay.
So to say that we're without sin, or we're not horribly racist, or we're not an awful nation, and we don't treat Arab people in a way that I cringe when I hear the way we talk about them or behave to them or handle our political situation, I cringe. I feel I'm ashamed. I'm embarrassed. I feel the need to apologize to Arab people the way they've been dealt in airports and the way they've been questioned, and general attitude towards them is horrendous. It's appalling, and I cringe when I see it. I feel the need to apologize to each and every one of them. But do I think our situation is comparable to any other sovereign nation around us? Absolutely not. It's a world apart.
Yeah. So, what do you think the solution is? And I know it's tough to. It's a big problem to be like, okay, it's on
guys,
you.
let's wrap this up. 2 minutes.
Yeah,
What's the solution?
yeah, you got 2 minutes. Do you
Okay,
think
solution, real quick.
3-party state, like a 2-party state, and like
I don't know what the
state
solution will be.
or no
I can tell you.
Like,
Okay, a one-state solution is not going to happen, I believe. I believe probably that the Palestinian Authority and other Palestinian leaderships, i.e. Hamas, i.e. other ones, are going to probably separate from each other as geographical and ideological entities into 2 different sovereign states.
and it would make sense, right? For if one's being more reasonable than the other, for Israel to do a deal with one,
and just
then
geographically
see if the other
speaking,
follows, right?
It's a huge impact. If you're geographically, you're totally separate from the other side of your country. That will do it. And if you look at it's just simply enough. You go and you walk in the street and you look in Gaza, you look at people in Gaza and you look at the people in the West Bank, you'll see it. These are not the same people. They hold different mentalities. They even look different. They talk differently. They are not the same people. And they claim to be the same people. Fine. If you define yourself as the same people, I respect that, because as Jews, for example, I'm a Mizrahi Jew and I'm half Ashkenazi as well. And I can say I'm not the same people as those people from Germany, but we're joined together under the same banner, and I accept that. I'm proud to be part of all pan-Jewish nation that doesn't necessarily say, well, you're from Switzerland and you're a different group. But I'm saying that they handle themselves in different ways, and probably that will be the key to a solution. They will separate from each other as entities, and further along the line, they will actually separate into two different countries.
Right, and then West Bank can be made to deal with, and then what happens to Gaza?
I guess that will be step one at some point. What I do think, theoretically speaking, is now happening under the surface, and I wanted to touch that, is Israeli Arabs, for example. Racism is on the rise, but on the other side, the level of acceptance of themselves and into Jewish society, I think, is a little bit higher now. It used to be separation out of respect, I think, until like the mid-70s, and then just separation out of racism. And now, for example, imagine this. Your grandfather or great-grandfather, who was born in the turn of the 20th century, lived through this occupation, and he saw the turmoil in his 40s and 50s and 60s. And his son was, still a traditional man. But his son, which is the father of these children of today, grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And he had different aspirations. He wanted to be modern. And he wanted to go out. And he wanted to do a lot of things that were unacceptable in Arab society. He wanted to integrate. So this is the first wave of people who had those traditions, like, for example, immigrants from Pakistan in the UK. The first generation is maybe traditional and tries to keep to its own, but the second generation already has aspirations to break that pattern, and the third generation are just 100% British because their parents are letting them do the things they wished they could do. And that's the same what's happening in Israeli society now. It's the first time in my life when I see Arab girls in tight jeans walking around with their cell phones in a predominantly Jewish city freely, without care, in groups, and just giggling and talking in Arabic freely and looking cool, looking pretty, and feel at ease. That's the first time that this is happening. Nobody talks about it. So there's a huge shift in consciousness in Israeli Arab people, that they are becoming modernized and westernized.
That's a really interesting point.
I'm trying to say it's going to be one of the main
I
bridges
prefer to
towards
say that's a
peace.
really positive note to end on.
Yeah.
It is a really positive note, and it goes back to our point about news, that this is the kind of news that we should be hearing about, because it gives you a sense of like, oh, there is some progress happening, even though politically and geopolitically and in the news it seems like it's futile and it's just getting worse and worse. That on the ground there's some positive stories and things are progressing in some ways for some people, and that's it's a good note to end on, because life is short, so we shouldn't take ourselves too seriously, and if we can't laugh at ourselves, what can we do? So if you want to be laughed at, reach out to us, we'll be happy to do it for you.
I do want to extend just for a couple of minutes, if that's okay. I'm sorry to push on everybody's time.
No, it's all good.
I'm gonna do the unmentionable and quote something that Jordan said.
Oh, go on.
Ooh, right. JP is in the house. Okay.
Finn's fanboy crush.
I don't
Yeah.
fancy
No.
him.
So I cringe somehow watching him, while I sometimes, many a times, agree with what he's saying. I somehow he's dodgy, and there's something not sitting right with this guy. And
It's
I know it.
it's the postmodern neo-Marxism. It doesn't make any sense. This political
That too.
criticism
But
makes no sense
he's
whatsoever.
stating some interesting statistics about the world getting increasingly better when we're talking about poverty and hunger and life expectancy and death per capita in the third world. And all these statistics are increasingly better, and they are better than anybody ever predicted. And that's a fact. That's true. And life is getting better. It's not getting worse. And I think when we're talking about conflicts like Israel and Palestine, I think the next generation might, since it's a generation that's blind,
Exactly.
it might actually have a better chance of reaching an accord because we're all being scrubbed with the same brush.
Yeah, we're globalizing.
So you and me, everybody grew up in different countries here. But if I'll make a Rick and Morty reference, everybody will laugh.
Yeah,
Or I don't know, if I just
exactly.
say JP and everybody, Jordan Peterson, everybody knows. We're all on YouTube. We're all being scrubbed by the same scrub.
Yeah.
So eventually, one day, we're not going to be that different.
Yeah. Culture changes, it just changes slowly. And this call as well is a point of fact in the fact that we're all different countries, we're talking to each other, but we've grown up with a lot of the same influences. We might have more in common than people in the village next to me who've grown up under different influences.
I mean, I grew up my whole life thinking I was Aryan, and then last year found out that I was a quarter Ashkenazi Jew, which was a surprise.
Sorry,
Really?
the
There you go.
tradition.
Thank you.
Quick, if someone throw money at walk.
Is that the tradition? That's brilliant. I could do with that.
But you have to note, first of all, they don't accept change anymore, and second, it will startle them.
I need a mentor. I'm new to this.
Kind of minimum. But I do think
remember
that if we're all exposed to the same media, and we're having a similar experience, it's not the same like 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, you had no clue what's going on in the next village.
Exactly, yeah.
And 20 years ago, nobody knew the same. Like, who the fuck knew about 9CAD and the internet?
Yeah.
Who gave a shit,
But
right?
we've only had the internet for what now? Like 20 years, 25 years?
30
We
years,
haven't
30,
seen the
37.
complete cultural
But for real,
influence
20 years,
of
and
internet.
for real, like 10 years at max when everybody's on.
Right,
even your
it's maybe
grandma.
10 years, right? So we haven't seen the cultural influences yet of the mass.
But it's accelerating, right?
But our differences are rapidly declining.
Right, exactly.
That's what I'm trying
Exactly.
to say. And I
I
think
completely
maybe
agree.
that will be an unexpected way to solve many a conflict,
Completely agree.
not just the Palestinian Israeli.
Yeah.
Well, that seems a very positive note to end what's been a thoroughly lovely episode. Thank you so much.
amazing.
For that.
Yeah, thanks,
I
guys.
really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thank you all for letting me blabber on. Yeah.
It was great to listen
My
to.
girlfriend will be very, very, very and great.
And remember, everyone, life is short. Don't take yourselves too seriously. If you can't laugh at yourself, reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to do it for you.
From Amsterdam, it's Marijn.
From Cadiz, I'm Finn.
From Cordoba, I'm Itamar.
And from Slovakia, I'm Chris. Thanks a lot, guys.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers, bye.